Singapore is officially one of the wealthiest cities on the planet, the fourth wealthiest to be exact. And every couple of years, a new report drops, the headlines go wild, and suddenly everyone is talking about how Singapore has more millionaires per square kilometre than almost anywhere else on Earth. 331,000 millionaires, according to UBS. A nation of winners. A financial miracle on a tiny island with no natural resources and no hinterland. But here is the question nobody asks out loud. What happens to that number the moment you strip out the HDB flat? Because that is the game being played with the statistics. And once you understand it, you will never read a wealth headline the same way again. Let us start with the real numbers. According to the 2026 Ministry of Finance occasional paper, the first time the Singapore government has ever published an official breakdown of household wealth, the average resident household in Singapore has a net worth of 1,755,000 Singapore dollars. That sounds extraordinary, almost $2 million per household. But before you feel rich, look at where that money actually sits. Property makes up 59% of total household assets. CPF accounts for another 20%. Together, those two buckets alone swallow nearly 80% of everything the average Singaporean family owns. That leaves roughly 22% in what you might call real, touchable, deployable wealth. Stocks, cash, bonds. Things you can actually use on a Tuesday afternoon. So the brutal reality is this. The average Singaporean household has approximately $391,000 in liquid, investable assets. Not 1.7 million, not even close. 391,000. Strip out the property and the CPF, and the millionaire nation suddenly starts to look very different. Now here is where it gets interesting, because two of the world's most respected wealth research firms have been measuring this in completely different ways, and almost nobody notices the gap between them. UBS counts 331,000 millionaires in Singapore. That number includes everything. Your HDB equity, your CPF balance, your cash, your stocks, all of it added together. UBS says 331,000 people clear the $1 million bar when you count every single asset they own. Henley & Partners, on the other hand, only counts liquid investable wealth. Cash, listed company shares, bonds, gold, crypto. No property, no CPF. Just the money you can actually deploy without selling your home or waiting until age 65. Under that definition, Singapore has 242,400 millionaires. That is a gap of nearly 90,000 people. 90,000 Singaporeans who are millionaires on paper, but are not millionaires when you measure what they can actually do with their money today. 90,000 people who technically crossed the finish line, but whose wealth is locked inside walls they live in and a government fund they cannot touch for decades. This is what researchers call asset rich and cash poor. And in Singapore, it is not a fringe condition. It is the financial default state of the majority. Think about a typical couple in their early 50s living in the 4-room HDB flat in Tampines. The flat is fully paid off. Current resale value? Around $650,000. Their combined CPF balances sit at roughly $280,000. And their savings and investments? Maybe $80,000 to $100,000 in cash, and a small ETF portfolio they started 2 years ago. Add it all up, and on paper, they are comfortably past the $1 million mark in Singapore dollar terms. They would appear in the UBS statistics. They might even get referenced in a newspaper headline about Singapore's wealth miracle. But here is the reality of their Tuesday. They cannot retire early because the moment they stop working, the mortgage on their car and the bills and the medical costs and the daily expenses don't stop. They cannot access the $650,000 in the flat without selling it and moving somewhere smaller. They cannot touch the CPF until they turn 65. And the $80,000 in cash? That is about 20 months of living expenses. Not exactly financial freedom. This is the tension that the wealth headlines almost never capture. And it gets sharper the further you go down the wealth distribution. The Ministry of Finance data shows that the bottom 20% of Singapore households have an average net worth of $293,000, which sounds okay until you realize that more than half of that sits in property equity and nearly 40% sits in CPF. The amount left over in actual deployable financial assets for the bottom fifth of Singapore households is likely somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000. That is not a safety net. That is a speed bump. Meanwhile, at the other end of the distribution, the top 20% of households average $5,264,000. The further up you go, the more your wealth is actually working for you. Here is what that actually means in practice. The reason Singapore can claim to be a millionaire city, while millions of its residents feel financially squeezed at the same time, is not a contradiction. It is a structural feature. The CPF system and the HDB housing program have successfully distributed an enormous amount of paper wealth across the population. But paper wealth and real financial flexibility are not the same thing. You cannot pay a hospital bill with your Tampines flat. You cannot fund your children's university with your CPF ordinary account when it has been wiped out by 20 years of mortgage repayments. Singaporeans are also, by global standards, deeply conservative investors. Cash and deposits represent about 18 to 19% of household wealth here. Stocks and funds, about 10%. Compare that to the United States, where roughly 68% of household assets sit in financial instruments. Singaporeans have been trained by decades of policy and culture to put their money in two places, their home and their CPF. And both of those places happen to be brilliantly designed for long-term security, but they are almost useless for financial freedom before retirement age. And here is a risk that almost nobody is talking about. That HDB flat you are counting as your net worth, it is not freehold. It is a 99-year leasehold. As properties approach 60 years remaining on their lease, they become harder to sell. Under 20 years remaining, they lose most of their market value. The current generation of Singaporeans in their 30s and 40s is treating their HDB flat as a retirement asset. But the clock on that asset is ticking quietly in the background, and very few financial plans account for it. So what actually separates the 242,000 Singaporeans who have crossed the line into real liquid wealth from the rest? Three things. They built assets outside their home. They did not just park everything in CPF and HDB and call it a plan. They used the supplementary retirement scheme to get an additional tax deduction while building a parallel investment pool. They invested in Singapore REITs and ETFs through regular automated contributions, even small ones. They built cash-generating assets while everyone else was focused only on the score on their property valuation website. They understood compounding early. The SGX ETF market hit a record $16.3 billion in assets under management by the third quarter of 2025, up 40% in a single year. The people driving that growth are not the wealthy. They are the middle-income earners who figured out that waiting for the property market to do all the work is not a strategy, it is a hope. And they measured the right number, not their total net worth including the flat, not the figure that UBS puts in a report. They tracked their liquid net worth, the number that tells you what your money can actually do for you right now, not in theory, not at 65, not when the lease expires. So here is the real question, not how many millionaires Singapore has. That number depends entirely on which definition you choose to believe. The real question is this: if someone took your home out of the equation tomorrow, would your finances survive? Would you still feel wealthy? Or would you discover that you have spent 20 years building a number on a spreadsheet while your actual financial freedom barely moved? Because the gap between the 331,000 and the 242,000 is not just a statistical footnote. It is the gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy. And the only way to close it is to start building on the right side of that line. If this video changed the way you think about your own net worth, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.